There's a version of you that would terrify the person you are right now. A version that has complete control over their impulses, their emotions, their thoughts, their time. A version that does exactly what they say they're going to do. A version that has turned themselves into a weapon. And here's what nobody tells you about becoming that person. It's not inspirational. It's not empowering in the way self-help books promise. It's dangerous. Because once you discover you can master yourself, once you realize the extent of your own power, you can never go back to being comfortable with weakness again. Friedrich Nietzsche understood something that modern productivity culture completely misses. Self-mastery isn't about optimizing yourself to fit into society better. It's not about becoming a more efficient worker or a more disciplined consumer. True self-mastery is about becoming so powerful, so self-directed, so free from external control that you become dangerous to every system that depends on your compliance. And that's exactly why this aspect of his philosophy has been forgotten. Because people who truly master themselves don't follow, they don't obey. They don't need your approval or your validation or your rules. Most people think they want self-discipline. They say they want to wake up early, eat clean, work hard, stay focused. But what they actually want is the results of discipline without the reality of it. They want the abs without the hunger, the success without the sacrifice, the respect without the rejection of a comfort. And Nietzsche would say, this is the mark of a weak person, someone who wants the appearance of strength without the actuality of it, someone who wants to feel powerful without actually becoming powerful. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Real self-mastery requires becoming someone you might not recognize. It requires killing parts of yourself that you've grown comfortable with, your excuses, your rationalizations, your little rebellions against your own goals, the voice that says just this once, or you deserve a break, or it doesn't really matter. Self-mastery means murdering that voice. And most people aren't willing to do that because that voice feels like protection. It feels like self-compassion, but it's actually just weakness wearing a disguise. Nietzsche talks about self-overcoming, and this is where his philosophy gets darker than most people are ready for. Self-overcoming doesn't mean improving yourself. It means destroying the current version of yourself to make room for something greater. It means looking at who you are right now, with all your habits and patterns and comfortable identities, and deciding that this isn't enough, that you need to become something more, and then systematically dismantling everything that stands in the way of that transformation. Think about what this actually means. You have desires that work against your goals. Those desires have to be dominated. You have fears that prevent you from taking necessary risks. Those fears have to be conquered. You have comfort zones that keep you small. Those zones have to be abandoned. You have relationships that enable your weakness. Those relationships have to be transformed or ended. This isn't self-improvement. This is self-warfare. And the enemy is you. Now here's where this gets truly dangerous. When you start winning this war against yourself, when you start proving to yourself that you can control your impulses, override your emotions, push through pain, do what you said you would do regardless of how you feel, something shifts in your psychology. You realize that most people are completely controlled by forces they don't even recognize. They're puppets of their appetites, their moods, their habits, their social conditioning. And you're not. You've cut the strings. You've become self-governing. Nietzsche calls this the will to power, but not in the way most people understand it. The will to power isn't about dominating others. It's about dominating yourself first. It's about bringing every aspect of your being under conscious control. Your body, your mind, your emotions, your time, your attention. Most people live their lives being jerked around by internal impulses they never question. They're hungry, so they eat. They're tired, so they sleep. They're bored, so they scroll. They're anxious, so they avoid. They're angry, so they lash out. They're aroused, so they indulge. But someone with self-mastery has a different relationship to their own impulses. They feel hunger and decide whether to eat. They feel tiredness and decide whether to rest. They feel fear and decide whether to advance or retreat. They've inserted consciousness between stimulus and response. And this creates a kind of power that most people can't comprehend because they've never experienced it. The power to choose, not just in theory, not just in big moments, but constantly, in every moment, with every impulse. Here's what makes this dangerous. Once you develop this power, you start to see how weak everyone else is. You see people who can't control their eating, their spending, their tempers, their tongues, their time. You see people who are completely enslaved to their phones, their comfort, their need for approval, their avoidance of discomfort. And it becomes very difficult not to feel contempt for that weakness. Very difficult not to look at most of humanity as a kind of herd that lacks the strength to govern themselves. Nietzsche saw this divide clearly. He talked about the herd and the individual, the masses and the exceptions. And he wasn't being cruel, he was being observational. Most people genuinely cannot master themselves. They lack the strength, the vision, the willingness to suffer that self-mastery requires. They need external rules, external authorities, external structures to keep them in line. They need society to tell them what to do because they can't tell themselves. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just reality. But if you're someone pursuing self-mastery, you can't stay in the herd mentality. You can't keep pretending that everyone has the same capacity for self-control. You can't keep making excuses for weakness in yourself or others. And this isolation, this separation from the mass of humanity, this is part of what makes self-mastery dangerous. Because you're separating yourself from the comfort of shared mediocrity. You're choosing to be alone in your discipline while everyone else bonds over their lack of it. Think about how this plays out practically. Everyone around you is hitting snooze, but you're up at 5. Everyone is taking the easy route, but you're choosing the hard one. Everyone is making excuses, but you're taking responsibility. Everyone is avoiding discomfort, but you're seeking it out. Everyone is being controlled by their appetites, but you're controlling yours. At first, this might earn you respect, but eventually it becomes threatening, because your discipline is a constant reminder of their lack of it. Your self-mastery makes their self-indulgence visible. Nietzsche understood this dynamic. He knew that people hate being confronted with what they could be, but aren't. That's why they'll try to pull you back down. They'll call your discipline obsessive, your standards unrealistic, your commitment extreme. They'll tell you to relax, to enjoy life, to stop being so hard on yourself. And they'll frame this as concern for your well-being. But what they're really saying is, your strength makes me uncomfortable with my weakness. They need you to stay weak so they don't have to feel bad about being weak themselves. This is where self-mastery becomes truly isolating, because you can't explain to someone who's never experienced it what it feels like to have complete control over yourself. They think you're suffering. They think you're denying yourself. They think discipline is prison. But you know it's the opposite. Discipline is freedom. The more you master yourself, the freer you become. Free from your own worst impulses. Free from external manipulation. Free from the tyranny of your moods and appetites and fears. But here's the paradox that makes this philosophy so complex. Nietzsche warns against a certain kind of self-mastery. He talks about the ascetic ideal, the person who masters themselves through denial and negation, the monk who achieves control by saying no to everything. No to pleasure, no to desire, no to the body, no to life itself. And Nietzsche says this is actually a twisted form of the will to power. It's power, yes, but it's power used against life, power in service of nihilism. So, there are two kinds of self-mastery, and understanding the difference is crucial. The ascetic masters themselves to escape life, to transcend the body, to deny desire, to achieve some otherworldly purity. But the Nietzschean master, the dangerous master, masters themselves to enhance life, to increase their capacity for experience, to become capable of greater pleasures, greater achievements, greater creations. They're not denying themselves, they're preparing themselves, building themselves into someone capable of more. Think of it like this. The ascetic doesn't eat dessert because pleasure is sinful. The master doesn't eat dessert because they're training for something that requires discipline, and that achievement will bring far greater satisfaction than the momentary sweetness. The ascetic avoids difficulty to minimize suffering. The master seeks difficulty to maximize growth. The ascetic says no to life. The master says yes, but on their own terms. They're in control of when, how, and why they say yes. This distinction is everything, because self-mastery without a purpose, without a vision of what you're building yourself for, becomes self-punishment. It becomes discipline for discipline's sake, and that's just another form of weakness dressed up as strength. Real self-mastery is always in service of becoming something. creating something, achieving something. It's not about control for its own sake. It's about control as a prerequisite for greatness. So, what are you mastering yourself for? This is the question most people pursuing discipline never ask. They're running on someone else's program, society's definition of success, their parents' expectations, some guru's morning routine. They're being disciplined in all these ways, but they never stop to ask why. What's the point? What are you building? What requires this level of self-control? And if you don't have an answer, then you're just performing discipline without purpose. And that's exhausting and ultimately hollow. Nietzsche would say true self-mastery begins with creating your own values, deciding for yourself what's worth achieving, what's worth suffering for, what's worth becoming, and then bringing your entire being into alignment with that vision. This means some desires get dominated because they're in conflict with your vision. Some fears get conquered because they're obstacles to your vision. Some comforts get abandoned because they're distractions from your vision. But it's all purposeful. It's all directed. It's all in service of something you consciously chose. And this is where the dangerous power emerges. When you combine self-mastery with self-created values, you become ungovernable. You can't be controlled by pleasure because you've mastered your appetites. You can't be controlled by pain because you've learned to push through it. You can't be controlled by fear because you've faced it down repeatedly. You can't be controlled by social pressure because you've separated yourself from the need for approval. You can't be controlled by propaganda because you've learned to think for yourself. You've become autonomous in the deepest sense. And here's what nobody tells you about autonomy. It's lonely. Because most people are controlled by these things. Most people need external validation. Most people avoid discomfort. Most people follow the herd. And when you stop doing those things, when you become truly self-directed, you separate yourself from most of humanity. Not because you think you're better, but because you're operating on a completely different frequency. You're playing a different game. You're living by different rules you created yourself. Nietzsche talks about the Übermensch, the Overman, and this is often misunderstood as some kind of superhuman. But what he's really describing is someone who has overcome the need for external authority, someone who has become their own authority, someone who has achieved such complete self-mastery that they can create their own values, live by them consistently, and never waver. Someone who has transformed themselves from a passive recipient of cultural programming into an active creator of their own existence. But becoming this person requires a kind of violence against yourself that most people aren't capable of. You have to be willing to betray your current self for your future self, to disappoint people you care about, to abandon communities that keep you comfortable, to let go of identities you've invested in, to push yourself past limits you thought were absolute, to sit with discomfort until it becomes familiar, to delay gratification for years, to choose the hard right over the easy wrong, again and again until it becomes automatic. This is why self-mastery is dangerous. Not because it harms others, though people invested in your weakness might feel harmed by your strength, but because it fundamentally changes who you are. You cannot develop true self-mastery and remain the person you were. That person dies. They have to die. Because that person wasn't capable of this level of control. That person made excuses. That person gave in to impulses. That person was weak. And you can't be both. You can't be the disciplined and the undisciplined self simultaneously. One has to dominate the other. And when you choose to become the master of yourself, when you commit to that path fully, you enter into a perpetual state of self-overcoming. Because there's no end point. There's no moment where you've achieved enough discipline and can now relax. Every level of self-mastery reveals a higher level that's possible. Every victory over yourself shows you a new battle to fight. You thought mastering your diet was hard until you try to master your thoughts. You thought mastering your thoughts was hard until you try to master your emotional reactions. It never ends, and that's the point. Nietzsche says, "The great individuals are those who give style to their character, and style requires constraint. A sculptor creates beauty by removing everything that isn't the sculpture. A writer creates power by cutting everything that isn't essential. An artist creates impact through deliberate limitation." And you create yourself the same way, by removing everything that isn't aligned with who you're becoming, by cutting away the excess, by imposing constraints that force you to become more refined, more focused, more powerful. But here's the shadow side of this. Someone with complete self-mastery can become cold, calculating, detached. When you've learned to override your emotions, when you've developed the ability to push through any discomfort, when you've separated yourself from the need for connection or approval, you can lose something essentially human. You can become so controlled that you're no longer spontaneous, so disciplined that you're no longer joyful, so masterful that you're no longer alive in the way that makes life worth living. Nietzsche saw this danger. He knew that self-mastery could become its own prison, that discipline could harden into rigidity, that control could calcify into coldness. This is why he emphasized the importance of amor fati, love of fate. Yes, master yourself. Yes, overcome yourself. Yes, become powerful. But don't lose the ability to say yes to life. Don't let your discipline kill your vitality. Don't become so controlled that you forget how to be wild when wildness is called for. The truly dangerous master is the one who has complete control and chooses when to release it, who can be disciplined or spontaneous as the situation demands, who can delay gratification or indulge immediately based on conscious choice rather than impulse or rigid rule following. This is a level beyond simple self-control. This is self-mastery in service of life enhancement rather than life denial. This is discipline as a foundation for freedom rather than discipline as a cage. Think about what this means practically. You've trained yourself to wake up at 5 every day. You have complete control over that. But on a day when staying up late with someone you love creates a meaningful connection, you can choose to break your rule without guilt or anxiety. Because you're not controlled by the rule, you created the rule and you can modify it. You've trained yourself to eat clean. You have complete control over your diet. But when there's value in sharing a meal that doesn't fit your plan, you can do so consciously, enjoying it fully, and then return to your discipline without the spiral of, I've already broken my diet, so I might as well keep going. This is the difference between someone who is controlled by discipline and someone who has mastered it. The controlled person is rigid. The master is fluid. The controlled person follows rules. The master creates and breaks rules consciously. The controlled person is enslaved to their own discipline. The master uses discipline as a tool. And this fluidity, this ability to be both disciplined and spontaneous, controlled and wild, restrained and indulgent, all through conscious choice, this is what makes someone truly dangerous. Because you can't predict them. You can't manipulate them. You can't control them through their appetites or their fears or their habits. And here's the ultimate danger of self-mastery. Once you achieve it, once you realize the extent of your own power over yourself, you can never unsee it. You can never go back to being comfortably weak. You can never make unconscious choices without feeling the weight of that unconsciousness. You can never blame circumstances or genetics or bad luck or other people for the state of your life. Because you know with absolute certainty that you have the power to change it, that you can master yourself, that you can overcome any habit, any fear, any limitation. And that knowledge is a burden as much as it's a gift. Most people want the benefits of self-mastery without the responsibility. They want to be strong, but also have the excuse of weakness when things get hard. They want to be disciplined, but also have permission to slack off when they don't feel like it. They want to be masters, but also victims when being a victim is convenient. But true self-mastery eliminates that option. Once you know you can control yourself, you can't pretend you can't. Once you've proven you can push through discomfort, you can't claim you're too weak. Once you've achieved difficult things through discipline, you can't say you're not capable. This is why Nietzsche called his philosophy dangerous. Not because it encourages violence or cruelty toward others, but because it demands a kind of violence and cruelty toward yourself, toward your weakness, toward your excuses, toward your comfortable lies. And most people aren't willing to be that honest, that brutal, that demanding with themselves. They'd rather stay weak and have sympathy than become strong and stand alone. But for those who are willing, for those who commit to the path of self-mastery, there's a kind of power waiting that most people never access. Not the power to control others, not the power to accumulate wealth or status or influence, but the power to control yourself completely. To be the author of your own actions rather than a passive recipient of impulses and conditioning. to create yourself deliberately, rather than accepting whatever you happen to become by default, to overcome yourself repeatedly until you've become someone capable of things you couldn't have imagined when you started. And yes, this makes you dangerous. Dangerous to systems that depend on your compliance, dangerous to people who need you to stay weak, dangerous to cultures that require conformity, dangerous to yourself when you fail to live up to your own standards. But it also makes you free in a way that most people never experience. Free from your own worst impulses, free from external control, free from the tyranny of circumstances, free to create your life exactly as you envision it. Nietzsche's forgotten philosophy isn't about becoming a better worker or a more productive member of society. It's about becoming so completely self-mastered that you transcend the need for external governance entirely. It's about developing a level of discipline so profound that you can be trusted to govern yourself according to your own values. It's about achieving a kind of sovereignty over your own being that makes you independent of all the systems designed to control you through your weaknesses. But here's the final warning. This path isn't for everyone. Most people genuinely can't handle this level of responsibility for themselves. They need external structure. They need someone else to tell them what to do. They need rules and authorities and social pressure to keep them in line. And that's fine. Not everyone is meant to be a master. Most people are meant to follow. And following isn't weakness if you genuinely can't lead yourself. But if you're someone who feels the call to mastery, if you sense that you're capable of more than you're currently expressing, if you're tired of being controlled by your own impulses and external authorities, then Nietzsche's philosophy offers a path. Not an easy path, not a comfortable path, but a path to genuine power. The dangerous power of complete self-mastery. The power to create yourself exactly as you choose. The power to overcome any version of yourself that isn't aligned with your vision. The power to stand alone in your discipline while everyone else seeks comfort in shared weakness. And the question isn't whether this is the right path. It's whether you have the strength to walk it, whether you're willing to do violence to your current self to birth your future self, whether you can endure the isolation of being stronger than those around you, whether you can carry the responsibility of knowing that you and you alone determine what you become. Because once you commit to mastery, once you prove to yourself that you can control yourself completely, there's no going back. You'll have access to dangerous power, the power over yourself, and that changes everything.